Welcome back, everyone. This episode is meant to serve as an addendum to the last video, which was called Your First Improvised Fugue, or Improvising Your First Fugue, or something like that. I got some feedback from some of you, and I wanted to clarify a few things that my conscience just won't allow me to let slide. I want to give a special thanks to Professor Kevin Corson, who was kind enough as to very thoroughly explain the omissions he thought were egregious enough to merit this video. And I agreed, so here we are. And I also want to thank Professor Kendall Briggs, who gave me a specific suggestion for an exercise that he thought would be helpful for his students and I assume for everyone. So this will be a quick one. I just want to address the following three things. First, I want to go back over the recommendations I gave for the order of entries. And I want to maybe more thoroughly discuss why some are better than others, why some you really should maybe never use, even though most of them turn out to be useful. I just want to give some clearer reasoning for that. Similarly, I want to do the same for the difference between real and tonal answers. And I'm still going to insist that I'm not going to give a theory lecture on this, but I do want to be careful about explaining this tale. And I said some things that amount to really sort of just being incorrect in my effort to abridge this discussion. So I'm going to try to rectify that. And lastly, I'm going to try to demonstrate for you this exercise which was recommended to me, which is to practice subject entries in two voices and just kind of trade off between the left hand and the right hand. And then we can really briefly discuss what you can do from there on your own. All right, let's hop into it. Okay, so this is take two of order of entries. What I did this time, in an attempt to be more thorough, is actually write out all 24 possible orderings in four voices that your voices might enter. And I've categorized them in a few ways. So if you look at the bottom here, it explains what these colors mean. The green ones are the ones that I had discussed last time were particularly good, especially for beginners and for everyone. They're the easiest because when voices enter in this way, the ones circled in green, all of the voices as they enter act as outer voices. So you'll never have an entry that's between two previous entries. Going in order of sort of best to worst, the blue is when a final entry is in an inner voice. And that's fine. I like to do that sometimes. I particularly like, for example, ASBT, when the final voice is in the tenor. Purple means that the penultimate entry is an inner voice. So, for example, you might have two voices that enter, for example, like A and T, and then, or rather S and T, and then A is between them, and then the final entry is outside. And then the red ones are essentially, there's only four, and that's essentially when you have the bass and the soprano entering back to back. And that's not great for a number of reasons. Not only is it difficult because you have two middle voice entries to accommodate, as well as, of course, changing from 5 to 1 or 1 to 5 and what have you in the process. You're making your life hard. But also it doesn't sound very good because in order to have the correct spacing for when all the voices come in, you're going to get this large void between these two voices that that are entering right after one another. So it sounds silly. Rhetorically, it's also nonsensical because entries in the middle voices are more hidden, especially after three voices. There was actually a quote posted recently by Professor Sanguinetti, who it was by Schoenberg, and Schoenberg was saying, I really prefer it when actually the fugue subject is hidden, and that's stupid. I mean, it's not stupid, but it really should be saved sort of for the development or something like that. It's nice when it's woven in, but certainly at the beginning, you don't want to hide the fugue subject. Rhetorically, it's because the fugue subject is the subject of your oration, so to speak, and you don't want that to be nebulous at the beginning. You want it to be clear what it's about. If you want to weave in some, sneaky, some sneaky thematic material, within some other stuff later, that's all well and good, but certainly now for the exposition, we should not be trying to, cloud over any entries. So to conclude here, I would say that the green ones are certainly the easiest, and there's a large number of them, which is great. You'll notice also that most of the green ones are clustered in the middle. That is to say that when the tenor or the alto enters first, you have the most opportunity to create this, this pattern where no entering voice acts as a middle voice. You also tend to get sort of zigzag patterns, meaning one entry is above, the next is below, and then the last one is above, etc. And these zigzags are more common when you have things that start in the alto, the tenor. The purple and the blue ones, it's sort of your preference. There are benefits and drawbacks to each, but I encourage you to experiment with all of them except the ones in red. This takes care of our discussion for entries in the middle voice. The other thing to consider is basically the range of your subjects. For example, if your subject, as subjects often do, spans something like a fifth, well, actually, they're usually a bit bigger than that, but for now, let's say that. If this is my alto, and then I'd like it to be in the soprano, this is all well and good because this fits inside an octave. So here's the subject, here's the answer, and of course the same thing will work in the left hand. So the range of this amounts to this, which fits within two hands. I don't think it's actually worth it to go back like I attempted to do last time and really try to codify ranges of subjects and when things will work and when they will not. I think it's probably good for you to experiment with this and figure out whether your subject is going to work in this ordering or that ordering. Of course, it goes without saying that the smaller your subject, that is, the smaller the range it occupies, the easier it will be to get your hands around it. And in fact, if you want to do things like 5 and 6 voices, your subjects are really best kept tiny and short. Okay, so that takes care more or less of what I wanted to cover regarding order of entries. So now let's tackle again this really messy business of real versus tonal answers. In the previous video, the issue is that I used some loaded language incorrectly. I used the terms head and tail, which are music theoretic terms with a specific meaning when analyzing fugues, and I did not really use them that way. The most egregious error I made, though, was I gave the impression, or in fact I might even said quite literally, that subjects with tails should be answered really. And that's just not true. Most all subjects have heads and tails. A head is, of course, just the beginning of a subject, and a tail is the end, the sort of last idea that we latch onto. And this fact alone has no real bearing on how they should be answered. Of course, it's the nature of the specific nature of these things that informs how subjects should be answered. What I was trying to get across was that one might add a lead-in to or from the answer, and this thing which I called a tail can in fact be freely varied in such a way as to give yourself time to take a figurative breath and get yourself into position for the next entry. Now, if in fact this lead-in is consistently treated throughout the fugue, then it becomes what theorists call a tail, and it can be considered a part of the fugue subject. If it's freely varied, we still might hear it as subject adjacent, which is why this method is valid. But theoretically, it is not a tail. It's something like a micro episode, or simply we'll just call it a lead-in. Where things get a little hairy is that you may have a subject whose head is answered note for note a fifth above, so what we would call a real answer, but whose tail, if you want it to be consistently treated, needs to be deformed in the same fashion that we treat tonal answers. So this is why I say that at first it behooves those new to improvising fugues to simply not worry about this deformation and instead allow yourself to get where you need to go by whichever means are easy and logical in the moment. So here's an example. So shown here is a fugue subject that starts in, well, I guess it's the tenor, and is answered in the alto. And it has this little lead-in as a tail here. For now, I'm just going to call this a lead-in. I don't really know what it's going to become because it hasn't been answered yet. Here in black up top, in the treble clef, this is treated in a fashion that can be consistent, right? So here's the same lead-in. And in this case, it's a real tail because it's really part of the subject. I can then go ahead and answer in the bass or the soprano using this same material in F major. Oh, I forgot the key signature. And it can be consistent throughout. And you see how this shape is maintained as best as we can without it being literal. If it were literal, right, if we had actually literally transposed this bit up a fifth like we did this bit, then we would in fact get this and this does not take us back to F major, right? This takes us all the way to G major or G minor, which is a valid move later, but or even maybe for an episode if you really want it, but not a valid return to F major, right? So this end bit needs to be deformed, just like we deformed the heads of our subjects in the last video, so that 1 to 5, which this is, becomes 5 to 1, which this is. Right? Now, where we can use this to our advantage is when we don't actually treat this as a tail, but rather just say sort of the fugue subject is this, in fact. And then whatever we do after that is just a way for us to get back to 1 or to get to 5 or to get to whatever key we want our next entry to be in. And so that's shown here in blue. This guy. So this guy is a different shape, right? I mean, this is not the same as that. But it serves the same function, right? This is still true. I still go from 5 to 1. I'm just doing it on my own terms. And this is, a lot of help when you're improvising because it's just one less thing to worry about, right? So now I basically just have this subject which is given this space, this free space, to get to my next entry. Now, if I were to treat this tonally, there's an advantage to doing that too, which is that this business of getting between 1 and 5 is taken care of for you in such a way that the first note or few notes of a fugue subject, very, very often, you can remain on whatever chord that you end up on, right? Because if something goes from scale degree 5 to 1, I'm putting that in quotes because sometimes it's 3, right? Then a tonal answer will go, from 8 to 5, right? Here's 5 to 1. This becomes 1 to 5, all right? And then I can just enter here because my fugue subject starts on scale degree 5, and here we are on scale degree 5, and of course here we are 1 and 8. So it's taken care of for you. I'll show you that over here. So this is the same subject. Remember we said we would just take this guy. And this is answered tonally. So here I have this 5-3, right? Try not to write like too much of a slob. And this becomes 8-7, right? And again, here is 5 to 1 motion, becomes a 1 to 5 motion. And here you'll notice that, for the first half of the bar, this is still F major here. For the first quarter of the bar, it's still F major. And similarly here we have C, right? So it's taken care of for us. So the advantage to a tonal answer is that, we can kind of, if we're not worried about keeping our counter subjects constant, which we very often are not in improvising fugues, we want to sound like we know what we're doing, but it doesn't, nobody's going to be sitting there with a dictation pad looking for parallel fifths and things like that. So there's, any corners you can cut that aren't too noticeable. You should. And tonal answers offers a unique corner to cut, which is that I can now have these voices sort of remain static as I worry about entering this new voice. Just a few final words about this. First of all, I forgot the key signature in this guy too. Just a few final words. One advantage of this top example up here is that it's not an even number of bars, right? It's 1.5 bars, or if this was if this were in 2/4, it would be 3 bars. And this is particularly nice because this whole thing sort of becomes a unit, and we don't hear it as quite as choppy as this. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the fact that it has a lead-in, although often lead-ins and lead-ins are an easy way to create this type of asymmetry. But this kind of asymmetry is really, really nice because rhetorically it allows you to create bigger sort of phrasing chunks. And in fact, if you have an even number of voices, I mean, this will work out. I mean, if I enter all my voices like this and I don't add a sort of intervening episode, then I'll end up having 6 bars at the end, and nice numbers like that. You'll have to sort of manually curve around the squareness at times of certain subjects, like the bottom one. And there are easy ways to do that. Add a little cadence or add a little episode or something like that. But this, in this top example, it's done for you. One final technical note is that technically in this bottom example, right, this would now be called the tail. Whereas in this case, this is called the tail up top, and this is still the tail if I treat it in blue. This bit is the tail if I treat it in blue, and then this is sort of nothing. This bit here is nothing, just to satisfy all the music theorists watching. All right, so I hope that clarified at least a little bit about order of entries and this messy business of real and tonal answers. So now I just want to change gears a little bit and show you all an exercise that you can do when starting out improvising fugues, which is simply just to trade the subject and answer back and forth in a few different keys in just 2 voices, just to get an idea of the interplay. So what I'm about to do is hop over to the keyboard and use the same subject that we've been working with. And I'm just going to play them sort of back-to-back, subjects and answers. I might decorate my counter subject a little bit, but I'll keep the harmony the same. I might cadence now and again. I might add a very, very short sequence, but it should be at least very clear when I'm entering the voices. And then to flesh this out, right, I think a good next step would be to maybe write these down and write out which keys you'd like to go to. And then you might add figures if you're comfortable playing continuo, and try fleshing out the harmony yourself. Otherwise, you might actually just put some chords or some general notes in there that don't amount to real counterpoint or unique voices, but just to give you an idea of the harmony of these things. And then you can actually try to get more literal with it and insert things in middle voices or use consistent counter subjects, or in fact, take good note of what your middle voices are doing and make sure that everything is in order. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.